生が全て定められていたとしたらどうだろう。人生におけるあらゆる選択、些細なものから大事なものまで選んでいるのではなく選ばされているとしたらどうだろう。無限の可能性などというものは幻想である。人はどれだけあがこうとも定められた道の上から降りられない。止める者は止めるように、貧しき者は飢えるように、善人は善人として、悪人は悪人として、美しき者、醜き者、強き者、弱き者、幸福な者、不幸な者、そして勝つ者、負ける者、すべて初めからそうなるように、それ以外のものにはなれぬように定められていたとしたらどうだろう。ならばどのような咎人にも罪はなく、聖人にも徳などない。何事も己の意志で決めたのではなく、そうさせられているだけだとしたら、ただ流されているだけだとした。問うが諸君がそれでよしとするのか。持てる者らはただ与えられただけに過ぎない虚構の玉座に満足か。持たざる者らは一片の罪咎なしに虐げられて許せるか。いいな、断じていいな。それを知った上で笑える者など、生きるということの意味を忘れた劣等種、人とは呼べぬ奴隷だろう。気の抜けた勝利の酒ほど今日のそげるものはない。運命とやらに舐めさせられる敗北ほど耐え難い苦渋はない。このような屈辱を、このような茶番劇をただ繰り返し続けるのが人生だ。よし、私はあがき抜こう。どこまでもどこまでも道が終わるまで歩き続ける。はるか果てに至った場所で私は私だけのオペラを作る。ゆえに諸君らの力を借りたい。虐げられ踏み潰され、今まさに殺されんとしている君ら、ひととき同胞だった者たちよ。諸君らは敗北者として生まれ、敗北者として死に続ける。その運命を呪うのならば、私のもとに来るが100度繰り返しても勝てぬのならば、1000度繰り返し戦えばよい。1000度繰り返しても勝てぬのならば、万度繰り返し戦えばよい。未来永劫、永遠に勝つまで戦い続けることを誓えばよい。それができるというならば、諸君らが術の一部となることを許可しよう。英語を勝つため。獣のたてが、その一本一本が諸君らの血肉で編まれることを祝福しよう。今はまだ私も君ら、そして彼ら、忌々しい輪の内ではあるものの、これから先ここでの選択が真に意味あるものであったと思えるように、いつかはきっとこの無限に続く輪を壊せるように。さあどうする諸君ら、この時代の敗北者たちよ。私に答えを聞かせてくれ。戦うか否か。
Hello and welcome to Diaz Irae.
Hello. What the hell was that exactly?
You'll see eventually. It's a speech by an important character.
Yeah, I can imagine, but I'm more confused because the logic doesn't seem to make sense.
Well, it should make sense. because those are actually the truths of the world in which Dies Irae takes place. He is stating this character carries occult truths about the universe, and he is calling to action people to fight against fate, which is kind of a theme of Dies Irae. It's definitely at like the epicenter of the plot, kind of people fighting against a deterministic world scenario.
Yeah, that became very clear. The author doesn't like Calvin very much, but I'm still confused about two things. One, is this the good and old weakening God
Oh,
trope of
definitely not.
Japanese stories?
It's a very weird plot, which I am excited to actually go through with everyone. So just as an
And
introduction,
second,
uh, this is
oh,
going to be what we're going to spend our time with to recover from the horrendous Uriel tainted experience that we had with Tokyo Babel.
So,
Uh,
no,
uh,
no, no. Let's do it properly. First, we stop to his fate because we I didn't have time to do it regularly, and then you guys went on to read Takababo, and
right.
apparently it was so bad that you guys decided to drop it
Yeah, it is quite
because
bad, and we decided to put it on indefinite hiatus until we find the strength to come back. The way
now
that
we
this is going to
found
if
a
work.
we
little
ever
bit of
do,
time. Now us four found ourselves with enough time to see a little bit of DSA, and maybe we'll continue if we have another chance. When we have another chance, when the stars align again,
if we have another
Yeah,
chance.
but there's a big difference
we will
between
have
this and
eventually another
Takababel.
chance.
This is a
We will
masterpiece, and
have.
Takababel
Is not
is Takababel. You
right.
know,
Uh,
it's just
the
Takababel.
the actual
I
structural
don't
way
know.
that this is going to work is hopefully I am going to or the B team people and I are going to be reading this kind of regularly the way that we were, and then Boomer is hopefully whenever he can going to join us.
I will
Uh,
drop when I
There is
can. I
another
will
thing
show up. I
about the
will. I
cycles.
will show up occasionally.
and if you
Okay.
can
But okay.
contribute with comments on the videos that we post, that would be cool. Because this is actually like a story that is worth following in the book club format. Just because it's so textually dense, there's a lot of reference to
Oh
art.
yeah. And by the way, a little bit of a disclaimer. None of us have done our homework. None here have read the gigantic list
Well, that's a
that is
okay.
the
Uh,
required read for
for context,
the
there was
Irae.
a massive 50 book long list that a member of the Discord server Hollow Moon posted
48 to
several
be
years ago.
specific.
Right.
No, no, just a
And
little bit, just a little bit. And just a thing, it is not just 50 books. It's 50 books like the Bible.
right,
It is
and
a, it's some big boys in there.
it's a joke list, but the the spirit that Dies Irae actually is super textually dense and referential is true. Like every few tens of pages, there is a reference to either like romantic opera or German poetry or the Bible or Nietzsche or Freud, especially Nietzsche and Freud. Uh, there's a lot of language lifted from the Western esoteric tradition of language and concepts. It's very much like an educated man's visual novel, which is kind of weird. It takes itself very seriously, uh, and
And
it lifts a lot
I
from
don't
history as
know.
well. Uh,
Yeah, and I don't know if we have the knowledge necessary to get all of that. We will get a lot of it. Not a
right.
lot of it. We
Uh,
will get
there
a
are
bunch of it. But
as
I don't
much
know.
as I can. I'll do what I used to do in the previous Tokyo Babel episodes, where at the either at the end of an episode or at the beginning of the next episode, I'll come bring in information, like background information for historical characters that make appearances in Dies Irae, of which there are many. In fact, a large quantity of the characters of Dies Irae are real people from the real world, and they have the same names and everything. So I'll try my best to kind of come up with little packets and talk about context whenever I can. But I expect these episodes to run a little long, uh, specifically because of the philosophical nature of Dies Irae, and kind of the fact that by virtue of it being highly referential, it invites debate and discussion of the way that it presents ideas. So
And
that's going to be exciting.
just the thing, talking about no, just talking about that sense of discussions. I already have the first thing, the first point to be talked about because there is a logical incongruency in his argument.
Sure. Shoot.
Because at the same time he says that the world is
Oh,
this
fuck. Wait.
team of puppets that no one has real control over, and everything they do.
Okay.
And no, it's already set. But and then in the same sentence, right against that, how the hell will you write against something people don't have free will?
It's actually pretty simple. If nobody has control over their fate, and someone powerful wants to break that, then he just has to give people the power to do
Right.
it,
The
you know?
implication
But
is
how,
that
how, wait a minute.
Is
How is someone
Are
have the
other
power
explications to what he said?
there are other
I'm just
explanations.
making.
The character in question, not to spoil the plot, where Unlimited has watched the show, and I am knowledgeable about this plot. I played one of the roots many years ago when I only played visual novels once through, so I know a little bit about it. Although it's quite a bit bigger than just the one root. But the character in question, just to set it up, is a figure of power in this plot. He's not a person like just a normal average human. He has the capacity to grant people the ability to contest their fate in this world of determinism. The problem is that in order for someone to be successful in doing that, there must be a long and tiring struggle, which is also set up in the initial in the speech that he delivers, right? So for you to be successful in
Yeah.
breaking your shackles, you must fight. There's a human life cost to being
I
able
get it.
to
You need to fight
deconstruct
a
You
hundred battles, to fight 1,000 battles, to fight 10,000
10,000
battles. I
battles,
get it.
right? Exactly.
But this person may be
Then
special, right? Because
I'm confused about a thing. Who are they fighting against?
Right, which
How
is
can they fight
this is part
against
of the
wait a minute. How can they fight against someone that apparently is powerful enough to control everyone's actions?
well, that's the thing. They're fighting the nature of reality. It's not that they're fighting a thing. It's that they're fighting the rules. The fight deconstructs the rules. It's kind of it's an abstract thing, but it gets explored in this prologue. Uh,
I have a question.
yeah.
If it is possible to break these natural laws of causality, um, so isn't the person if the effort exists in the first place, if it is a process, then isn't the process also predetermined? Like,
That's a that's a useful question. That's a useful question, and the answer to that is kind of yes. Uh,
How can you
so
fight against it if it's already a preset
that
process that you have no control over,
so
no power over?
you have to keep in mind that Dies Irae is by its nature as kind of a weird fiction, a new weird novel, part of the new weird movement of which Chuni games are kind of a subsection. It is a deeply
Wait a minute. We are in House of Leaves level stuff,
yeah,
or
right. That's kind of the idea. By virtue of it being a new weird novel, it is told from a postmodern perspective. So in the same vein that characters in Fate Stay Night often are either actively misleading the POV character, or they're just saying things that they think are true but they're actually wrong. Characters in Dies Irae, especially this divine figure that comes in the prelude, offering humanity a chance to break free from its shackles, is since he is in control of your ability to struggle against destiny, he is also in control of destiny to an extent. So the presentation of the game is part of the game, right? It's willful misdirection of the people receiving the message. I feel like that's part of the implication here.
Okay, so whoever is breaking them of their shackles is not exactly a good guy. Got it.
There's a lot of gray in the world of Dies Irae, which is curious because a lot of the characters are Nazis. as a as is well known.
We can we say that? Are we allowed to say that out loud?
We can. We're gonna be demonetized. We would be demonetized, but we don't make any money off of any of this, so it's fine.
Okay then.
So a lot of the characters in Dies Irae are people that were once or are currently members of the Nazi Party in Germany in the 1940s, 30s to 40s.
That has
So-
to do with their destiny, or they're breaking their destiny.
Right, that's part of the question. However, many of them are like unquestionably responsible for causing ludicrous amounts of terrible evil acts, and they're unambiguously aligned with an evil entity. However, they pursue through evil
Or-
methods this path of liberation, which is kind of like an interpretation of the Buddhist ideal of liberating oneself from the cycle of death and rebirth.
I
Right?
was
So
I was not expecting to see Nazi Buddhists today, but okay.
yeah, the ultimate goal of these characters is not negative, in the sense that they want to break themselves from an authoritarian world state, and just pursue their freedom in its full extent. However, most of them are considered evil people by any like moral metric. But it's interesting because the way that they're presented personally, on a personal level, by the fact that we spend time with them, we see them detached from their evil nature a lot of the time, from their evil work, I should say. The person and the work are juxtaposed. So this is another theme of Dies Irae, like how you can perceive people differently based on the role that they take, and whether they are actively taking that role or not, and kind of the dubious boundaries between moral extremes, just kind of the fact that most people exist on this very dark, weird moral gray. These are two things that are explored in this game. So hopefully, I think that I have the audio set up well. Does anybody else have any preliminary points before we dive into the prologue?
Say that we don't have like plain Noah, plain
Your audio is cutting up quite a bit.
What means Dies Irae?
What?
What it means Dies Irae?
Oh, Dies Irae that's a great question, actually. That's context. Dies Irae means the wrath of God. It's most famously a requiem in Catholicism. A requiem is a kind of ritual liturgical song that they sing for the dead, when the dead die.
Yes.
They sing so that to ask God for mercy in judging the souls of the dead, so that they live in peace. Dies Irae famously was rendered into musical form by Mozart in his Requiem suite that wasn't finished. And that song features in this game as the theme of an important character. But it's very dramatic, kind of dark thing, which is also about the passage of humans from one state to another in their interaction with universal law, right? If God is kind of the executor, the magistrate of a universal law, then it kind of like is a symbolic expression of the intent of the main theme of the game, in that sense. And it's also like referential to the actual plot of the game, but that's going to become clear several tens of hours from now, as UBW knows. But yeah.
Oh boy, this is gonna be.
Alrighty. So May 1st, 1945, Berlin, Germany, 12:27 a.m. The closing act of the Second World War was the manifestation of total war such as had never been seen before. No, the term carnage would have been more appropriate. Outmanned in every way, Berlin stood in complete isolation, slipping toward the crevice of annihilation. The nearly 500,000 troops marching under the banner of the Red Army had surrounded the capital, making escape virtually impossible. Guns roared, mingling with the screams of the dying in an incessant cacophony of terror as the city was razed and its people massacred. Bloodshed, carnage, all in order to eradicate the enemies of this world, be they young or old, man or woman. Justice, revenge, love, peace, oppression, liberty, equality. The slogan one chose to attach to the horror made little difference. The chaos engulfing the bloody streets demonstrated quite readily the atrocities that would manifest when man was presented with a convenient higher cause to justify them with. So you can see that right straight away from the beginning of the game, you have a very contentious kind of contest of that morality, the gray morality question. Of like, most people agree that the violence against the Nazis is justified because they were committing greater acts of violence against innocent people. But Masada...
I don't know if justified feels too much. It is probably the closest thing we have seen to a fair war, with
Right.
some asterisks in there or some quotes in there.
But then
yeah,
straight on, Masada brings this to the forefront of questioning of like, sure, they are evil, but is indiscriminate slaughter is still justifiable in the face of evil? Is evil justifiable with evil? It's kind of an interesting beginning question.
Yeah, the good enough. If I recall correctly, is Dresden the point that it's usually the center of the discussion, right? The bombing of Dresden.
Right, Dresden is kind of the big signifier of this rhetoric in the discussion of World War II historiography. Yes, for
Because the city
example,
was bombed, because it was a manufacturing center, but at the same time, it was mostly civilians that died in there. So,
Right.
So that's...
which is kind of a thing that is present in Slaughterhouse 5, which I guess is the reason why it was in that list. Slaughterhouse 5 deals with kind of the horror of being in Dresden during World War II and just seeing the humanity, to quote Conrad in Heart of Darkness, like the horrendous destruction of innocent life because of their attachment to the regime that was in truth evil. It's an interesting situation. In this corner of the city, a blinding light flashed, followed by a roaring explosion. This latest bombardment sent even more soldiers, at least 3 whose silhouettes were still recognizably human, to their deaths, spreading their remains across the pavement. Letting out a loud curse, a man leapt out of the trenches with Panzerfaust in hand. Protected by the covering fire of his ally Schmeisses, he dashed over into the effective firing range. He rose to his knees, took aim, and pulled the trigger, firing a heat warhead. That's a high explosive, armor-piercing tracer round. The projectile shot forward, smashing into the right flank of the tank. Its armor dissolved in accordance with the Neumann effect, and the tank imploded in a torrent of liquefied metal in 1,000-degree flames. The man tossed aside his Panzerfaust, and backed by comrades from behind, started cleaning up the remaining foes with his Mauser. Such was war. It allowed no time for idle thoughts. Only slaughter, murder, and bloodshed. No man could keep his sanity in this hell, and so the perpetrators of this chaos howled and raged, never looking back, reveling in boundless insanity to keep their blood afire. Within this flaming wasteland of gunplay, soldiers single-mindedly continued their murderous dance as if it was some ungodly ritual. Of course, in reality, it was all but child's play. Soldiers against soldiers, rifles against pistols. No matter how fiercely they fought on this battlefield, the outcome of this war was already set in stone. The Third Reich had crumbled, the ambitions of its visionary leader lost in the flames of war. What remained on that tattered battlefield was the shaken remnants of the defeated, and the mob of the victors, flocking like vultures to the smell of decaying flesh. Certain death, inescapable defeat. Any attempt to retaliate was merely a self-serving act of revenge with no hope of salvation. The situation had surpassed anything that might elicit notions of despair, transforming into no more than an absurd comedy of sorts. And yet, his heart beat still, his hand gripped steel. He would not stop so long as there were enemies to kill. For it was his sworn duty. If there existed even one thing, anything at all, to justify this hellfire, be it sheer insanity, then that by itself would have been a blessing in disguise. Honor and glory, debased and disgraced, worth less than pig shit. Yet even human life remained the cheapest currency. That was reality. After the wiping out leftover foes and regrouping with his comrades, it dawned upon the man that there were only 3 of them left standing, himself included. The company tasked with protecting this block had been completely annihilated. The situation was anything but promising, and still more enemies were on their way.
先ほどあなたが使ったのが最後ですよ、総長。これはいよいよ終わりが見えてきましたね。
I find interesting two things.
Yeah.
Two things. One, this is the last battle of World War II,
Yeah.
the Western Front. So most likely these soldiers are children or teenagers.
Yes.
The Hitlerist youth.
Right.
So that adds another sense of disturbing to
Right.
everything going on.
Masada actually
And
weaves this into the
this-
plot, which at the end of
Oh,
World War
boy.
II, children were being... They reduced the age of conscription to like 15 or 14-ish, right? Because they were desperate about like raising up enough men to be able to fight back the Soviet invasion.
And second, I find it very interesting this to be said in Nazi Germany, considering that putting this in the Eastern Front would be very interesting too, especially considering he's Japanese. Because especially him saying that Germany stands alone in the war. It's
Right.
quite interesting to say from the perspective of a Japanese dude.
And it's interesting too that the way that the sound design is made. You can hear not only the guns firing and the grenades exploding, but also the sound of like those little sleeping things that they put sick people in to like take them to surgery and whatever, kind of rolling through the battlefield. It's a very all-encompassing thing. It doesn't shy away from the human loss of either side, which is kind of a refreshing perspective, I feel, in these World War II settings. The young man flashed a bitter smile as he handed over his Schmeisse to the other. The older man glared at him, but offered no more in the way of reproach. The war is lost indeed. That was the bitter truth of it. Berlin had fallen, the company massacred, and the remaining 3 soon to join them.
まあここまで来たら別にそれもいいですけどね。ただ最後はかっこよく行きたいから。どうせ逃げられやしないんだし。
貴様、名前は？
ヨアヒム・ブラウナーと言います。総長は？
俺はバルター・ゲルリッツ。ま、名前も知らない奴と死ぬのはお互いにごめんだからな。おい。
The Master Sergeant Walter Gialitz directed his gaze at the final survivor of the company, a young boy who had so far remained silent.
貴様の名前は？
あ、その
The boy, eyes darting as he failed to hide his shock, was even younger than Joachim, barely in his teens. If Walter had a son, he might have been around the same age.
マルコ・シュミットと言います。そう
Walter was about to ask what a mere child was doing out there, but ultimately swallowed his words. It was a foolish question. The enemy would show no mercy to them, even to their children. The reason for it was very clear. They were the bitter enemies of the Red Army, the despised members of the Schutzstaffel. So these are SS people. They're not Wehrmacht people. Even if they are.
At the same,
Oh, go ahead.
yeah, because considering the kids, it feels like they are not quite SS as we know it.
Right. Even if they were to surrender, the Soviets were doubtlessly uninterested in taking them as prisoners. As such, fighting until their last breath was the only option left to them. I think this is kind of interesting too, because the SS did have a history of forcibly conscripting people that did not intend on fighting the war. If you look at the Ukrainian front,
Ordinary,
they would raise as many people as possible from the native crowds and indoctrinate them quickly into fighting for them. So it was very interesting.
not even indoctrinate. Ordinary men, if I recall correctly, the
Right,
book
just
that
enslaving.
works on that the dude, yeah, the dudes are just simply thrown in the background, say, hey, gather these Jews for us, and then
Right.
later say, hey, now you shoot the Jews, and then later they will put them to do the worst things.
Right. As such, fighting until their last breath was the only option left to them. Walter was certain that Joachim was ready to give his life for the fatherland. The boy, on the other hand,
この戦争が終わったらベルリンはドイツは僕たちの家族や友人は一体この先
知らないな、そんなことは。どうせあれだ、戦勝国様が偉そうに俺たちを悪魔だ、非人道的だなどと裁くのさ。
it's also interesting to me personally, like how the people of the SS in the scene try to downplay the horrific violence that they commit as being just another act of subversion of history by these evil conspirators, the liberals, right? I feel like it's a very in touch thing for contemporary history, where some people also aligned with more authoritarian ideals feel like they're being silenced unfairly by a morally superior or morally self-superior liberal kind of section of politics, even though these people were in fact complicit in committing terrible political violence at the time. It's always
I would
easy
argue
to
that
put
it
yourself as a
also-
victim.
I would argue it also feels interesting more in a less tongue-in-cheek way, because he's probably referring himself to the Soviets, who were doing that.
Of
Who were
course, true.
doing also inhuman things, but were kind of painting themselves as the good guys.
Right.
At the same time, his comment is correct and wrong.
Right. I mean, it does bring us back to that thing of like everybody considers themselves to be the hero of their own story, right? Regardless
But at
of
the same
the
time,
things that they
everyone's
actually
in
do.
war. And at the same time, everyone in war has their hands dirty in blood at the end of it all. So
Right. Joachim
no
shed
one
his
really.
Joachim shed his disaffected act, the bitter tone in his voice, making his true position on the situation clear.
ドレスデンに母さんと妹
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
にぶっ飛ばされて骨のかけらも見つからない悪魔だって一体何の冗談だ
I find interesting
国
is
のために
we
戦
were
ってるだけ
fighting to protect our fatherland,
Right.
because that is clearly and clearly following the Hitler's.
Right. It's
Vital
clearly
state.
untrue for our perspective, but from the perspective of an indoctrinated youth, the fatherland was the big Germany, like the Great Germany, right? Groß Deutschland, the
Yeah.
whole territory of Europe, and the people that were occupying those lands were, in their perspective, were illegally or unfairly occupying land that was supposed to be German, right? By historical right and racial privilege. So to them, it was a question of protecting their territory, even if that was like drastically incongruent with the actual reality of history, right?
Mm-hmm.
He would never surrender, yet even if he gave his life in the battle to come, the outcome of the war had already been decided. Nothing could change that, at least of all himself. With this defeat, their fatherland and their descendants would... A single soldier was powerless to alter the great current of a war. Joachim tried to express his dissatisfaction with that reality as best as he could, while Mako silently listened.
だから俺は
Several rifle shots echoed from the left just then. Valta and Mako just barely managed to duck into cover, but Joachim was not so fortunate. His head was shot clean off by the first wave, followed by an entire volley of bullets being unloaded into his chest. Pelted by machine gun fire, Joachim's body contorted in a queer manner, almost reminiscent of some form of dance before finally hitting the ground. An anticlimactic finale indeed for the youth who had only moments prior expressed his desire to fight to the bitter end. But such was the reality of the situation, the reality of war. There were no heroes here, no messiahs or miracles to save them, only men dying like insects. And should one allow his soul to be overcome by wrath or despair when confronted with this knowledge, it would only serve to invite the jaws of death to consume him next. The chaos of war would not tolerate idle thoughts. Knowledge of one's duty was all that was necessary. As Valta rolled into the safety of a ruined building, he shouted the name of his lone surviving comrade with all the strength he could muster. But instead of words, the sole reply he received was yet another flash, followed by a fiery explosion. The upper half of the young boy's body was flung at Valta's feet. The cramped alleyway was heavy with the stench of blood and scorched entrails. Valta powerlessly dropped to his knees into the vast sea of blood.
村長すみません僕お役に立てませんでした
Mako smiled. Even as the last embers of his life faded away, it was unbelievable someone could still form words in a stage such as this. Valta took the boy's hand.
痛くないですここで死んだら僕たちは一体これは何のために村長教えてください僕たちは悪魔の
As the gunfire continued, a brand new tank rolled onto the battlefield. Mako Schmidt was beyond help. Not even God could save him now. And so Valta's rightful place now was on the battlefield, his hand clutching a gun and not the hand of the dying soldier. His ears lent not to the naive parting remarks of a boy, but straining to hear the breathing of his enemy. He knew that better than anyone, and yet
僕たち悪いことしたのでしょうだから目に遭うのでしょうか
Joachim
That boy
Valta.
can talk a lot.
I know, right?
That boy can talk a lot. That boy can talk a lot for someone that doesn't have the lower half. Jesus.
Joachim Valta and so many other German soldiers just like them had done nothing more than take arms to protect their fatherland and loved ones. Was
That's
that
true.
truly a sin?
That's true, boomer. Talk
Surrounded
about
by the
first.
flames of a dying capital, the young boy spoke in mere disjointed fragments, voicing a question Valta himself would have loved to pose to the heavens above. Most likely. Yet, after mere seconds of doubt, Valta answered curtly.
戦争が悪いのではなく戦争に負けることが悪になるのだ
Such was the only way of the world, a cruel, bitter truth. Valta found himself in a growing resentment for the Lord.
それなら次は勝ちたい
Mako Schmidt then quietly passed away in Valta's arms, the man gazing up at the heavens. The young soldier smiled, and death, albeit tainted with blood and mud, still held traces of boyhood.
シュミット恨むな
A bitter smile, mirroring Marco's, crept onto Valta's face.
次は勝とう次で勝てなければ次の次でそれでもダメならまたその次で100万回も繰り返せばこんな
His words,
Wait,
yeah.
wait a minute. Is that the feel about rejecting fate? Will this game end with the Nazis winning World War II?
No, not that. But it's you'll see. His words might have seemed the ramblings of a lunatic beset by the armies of death, but they were more than that. Valta cocked his Schmeisse, confirmed it was loaded, then charged out of the ruined building into the open. He unconsciously let out a battle cry loud enough that it threatened to rend his throat. Would he end up gunned down like Joachim or share the same fate as Mako? It hardly mattered anymore. Either way, he'd merely die a miserable death befitting this miserable war. His mind was occupied by such despaired thoughts. In no way could he have predicted what was to come next.
天に増します我らの父よ。願わくは皆の尊まれんことを。
This is the first line of the Our Father prayer from the
彼らに
Bible.
永遠の安息を与え、絶えざる光もて照らしたまえ。
It was his soldier's intuition that drove Valta to reflexively take shelter. His vision was drowned out by a blinding white light and an explosion so fierce it dwarfed all previous bombardments, an explosion that seemed to rip apart the very heavens. Valta realized that this explosion was far beyond the level of any weapon that could have possibly been employed in urban warfare. What in the world had happened? The city he had literally staked his life to protect had been reduced to a charred wasteland. Although it took quite a while for Valta to regain his sight and hearing, there was still not enough time for him to make sense of the situation. Part of him wondered if it was all a sick joke. Only one thing was clear. Both his allies' corpses and the encroaching enemy troops had been annihilated. No bombing raid could have ever inflicted such immense damage, and although Valta had managed to survive the attack itself, his resulting wounds were deep. Pieces of steel and concrete blasted in his direction by the explosion had pierced his back and flank. The hand that once held his shmaisa was blown off from the elbow. It wasn't even worth the effort to attempt to discern the number of more minor injuries. His incessant bloody vomit told him that he had also suffered severe internal damage. He would not make it. Valta swore blindly, no longer certain of the target of his indignation. Just then, the voice from before rang out again.
我が祈りを聞きたまえ。生きとし生けるもの、すべては主に帰せん。我が魂よ。再び安らぐがよい。主は報いてくださるがゆえに。
This is, of course, a requiem prayer. It was a requiem offered up to the fallen soldiers, one sung in a beautiful voice. Not even a prestigious church choir could produce a melody quite this dignified. Yet at the same time, the scorn seeping into the voice was all too evident. Only upon the eve of the apocalypse itself could such a voice be conceived of as an angel's. It sung of the dead with scorn, ridicule, and mockery, deriving the utmost pleasure in trampling upon every last remnant of the dignity they possessed, the voice of a destroyer intoxicated by mayhem. This was the product of a black mind possessed solely by an inhuman malice.
彼らに永遠の安息を与え、絶えざる光もて照らしたまえ。
And so, stepping onto the vast expanse of debris, the destroyer appeared, the demonic requiem at his lips. It was a young boy, lacking in years even in comparison to Mako, with a face so delicate that a careless glance could easily mistake his features for that of a girl's. A single look at the boy was enough to give Walter chills. His teeth began to chatter. Although he had lost a considerable amount of blood and his vision had grown hazy, the reason behind the freezing chill at his back lay elsewhere. The sheer enmity and bane radiating from the boy's visage indeed contributed to that.
Hello?
Hello, hello.
Hello?
Yeah? We can hear it.
Okay.
But to Valta, the most dreadful thing was the fact that he knew that face. There lived no man who
He's
fought
going
on
to be
the
a
Eastern
very
Front.
part character.
Yep. And knew not of this boy. A beast possessed by an insatiable hunger, his aberrant mind ruled by inhuman madness, his single eye gleamed, silver locks swaying. He gripped a pair of guns, each engraved with a wolf's sangle, the rune of the wolf. There was no doubt. It was a face Valta could never forget. Yeah, unlimited?
Okay.
The face of a boy who had supposedly died 3 years ago.
シュライマー少佐殿
Eastern Front Assault Corps Special Unit Leader, SS Major Wolfgang Schreiber, An unchained beast that
Okay.
slaughtered both friend and foe, the ashen demon that had supposedly met his end during a purge. How could he be standing here?
ああ、誰かと思えばバルター・ゲルリッツ総長かい。アインザッツグルペンじゃ迷惑かけたね。
Hardly the words
Wait,
one
so
would
he-
offer a dying comrade, especially one whose death was most likely caused by Schreiber himself. The boy flashing an innocent devilish smile in the front of Valta was no doubt the very same person he remembered. And yet his armband bore not the swastika, but a different symbol altogether, almost as if he was no comrade at all.
あなたはなぜここに？
なぜも何も僕も君も軍人だろ。戦って殺すのが商売なんじゃないのかな。
The boy playfully surveyed the landscape as proof enough of his statement, and what followed was nothing short of a natural. Something akin to an opaque vapor rooted from their vicinity, like a fog or a haze. At the same time, Walter's senses were assaulted by a dreadful moaning. These were the cursed cries of the fallen, fated to suffer and lament until the very end of time. This endless chorus of lamentation caused even the seething air of the battlefield to cool. These were the spirits of the dead. Walter felt like he could almost make out the faces of Mako and Joachim among the swirling mass, as well as the destination toward which they were spiraling. Straight into Schreiber's Totenkopf-eyed patch. He was devouring the very souls of those he had slain. Confronted with such a repulsive and worldly spectacle, Walter could not determine whether he should give himself over to rage or simply weep. He longed for the repose of insanity.
さて、それじゃあ総長、僕はもう行かないといけないんだけど。君はどうする？
Schreiber, seemingly done with his meal, warily turned his neck to Walter, who was breathing his last, not in any condition to spill blood like a soldier should.
殺し足りなくはないのかい？今さら連中の100や1000を殺したところで何も変わりやしないけどね。でもだからって何もせずに黙ってる必要なんかどこにもない。見なよこのベルリンを。全くひどいありさまじゃないか。こんなものが僕らの求めた千年帝国の終わりだなんて誰が納得するって言うんだよ。
Content,
できないよね。
Walter threw a piercing gaze at the smiling boy. Indeed, no one in their right mind would be content with such an outcome. He had friends to call his own, a family to go home to, a woman to love. He cherished this country. All that became tainted due to Germany's defeat, dishonor that no centuries could wash clean. That was...
許せないよね。薄汚い劣等ごときが我が物顔で帝都を蹂躙するなんて。女や子供や年寄りを犯して殺して吊るすなんてさ。総長、忠勇なるドイツ軍人バルター・ゲルリッツ総長殿、君の気持ちを聞かせてくれ。
The amount of blood leaking forth from Walter's mouth made speech difficult, but his feelings were set. Joachim, who vowed to fight till the bitter end, Mako, who wished for victory, their feelings as well as his own. The boy standing before him was unmistakably from the fold of the devil, but such things mattered little at that point. What he wanted was... victory, honor, and glory for the fatherland, to bring peace for friends and family that had fallen, to bring prosperity for generations yet unborn, and above all else for his very own soul.
ジーク入る。そうさ総長、素晴らしいよその息だ。君のような勇者にこそあの方の血肉となる資格がある。戦争は終わらない。僕たちが終わらせない。何度でも何度でも何度でも何度でも続けて続けて続けて続けて
Grant us victory.
掴むまで。共に行こうじゃないか。無限に続く戦場へ。
We shall claim victory in the next war, if not in the one after that, hundreds and thousands and millions of battles repeating over and over again until this outcome can finally be toppled. Schreiber thrust his Mauser in Walter's direction as the last light of the man's soul began to fade.
彼らに永遠の安息を与え、絶えざる光もて照らしたまえ。
His requiem was one of scorn for the fallen, pregnant with malicious intent. and yet Valta thought it beautiful like the song of an angel. It was then that he finally realized that this was the apocalypse, and that he would soon join the ranks of those marching to destroy the world. He would become a strand of the beast's mane, one of many in his legion. The boy gazed to the heavens and offered up a spitting cackle, his silver hair dancing. The soul of Valta Gyalitz was sucked into the boy's blood-crazed eye and vanished. Coincidentally, I just want to interject here. The Scheibe is an interesting character because he is presented as a Germanic, monstrous wolf that eats souls. Right? If you go back to Nordic mythology, this is evocative of Fenrir, the big wolf that's attached to a tree. That during the end of the world becomes free, right? And then he roams around the world,
Yeah,
killing,
he's the one that
eating
kills
meat.
Odin.
Right. But it's
He's
interesting
the one that kills.
that the way that he's presented also has a bit of Odin in him, right? With the missing eye and the eye patch, through which he can see, he can catalyze magic, he can peer into the occult, as it were. So he's a little bit of Fenrir and a little bit of Odin at the same time. It's kind of an interesting presentation of the character.
Pretty much.
At the same time, in another place, a new nightmare was unfolding. An entire battalion of at least a dozen tanks had failed to bring down a single man. No, an entire battalion of tanks was being destroyed by a single man. In the center of the supernatural maelstrom stood a somber specimen of a man, darker than the blackest of nights. Beneath his neatly worn uniform stretched a body of steel trained to the utmost limit. Perfect fusion of the sort of artistry found in the great sculptures of antiquity and raw martial prowess. The man wielded nothing, not even a short blade. He fought with his fists alone. They were all that he needed to sunder the armor of a tank as if it were nothing more than scrap paper. Needless to say, no mere man could hope to imitate this display. Indeed, he was a monster, or if not a weapon taking human form, a fortress upon the battlefield. Either way, the Soviet forces were dealing with an inhuman soldier, a being exceeding human boundaries. Furthermore, the towering beast of a man had yet to so much as attempt to evade any of the artillery fire being leveled upon him. Even after being pelted by countless bullets and tank shells, his body remained unscathed. However, that was only natural. For everyone knew this man, this strength in his name, knew that he was a hero who had died a year before, just like Scheibe, and that and what was dead could not be killed.
By the way, that's a weird thing because if this dude gonna be another German officer who existed in real life?
I'm not sure if he's a reference to a real person, but he might be. These characters, all the real characters that are employed in the plot of Dies Irae, either all died or disappeared from the record of history. So they're interesting in that sense.
Because now it feels really weird to think that these were actual real people. Like, damn.
The man let out a deep breath.
Damn.
His overflowing will melted the surrounding rubble into toxic waste, blasting it afar with a gust of burning wind. His tightened muscles expanded to their extremes as if longing for release. A hammer of steel, there existed nothing in this universe that could withstand the blow he was preparing to unleash. The energies gathered into his fists gave birth to refraction, causing the very visage of the man to distort. But as the man finished swelling up with energy and was about to unleash destruction, his fierce concentration suddenly let up, just as it was about to reach critical mass, almost as if something had ruined his mood. Perhaps he thought the panicking soldiers, having lost their morale, were not worth even killing. Then had those soldiers miraculously escaped the jaws of death? Of course not. The song of the cruel huntress echoed across the night. This is also from actual artwork. This is a quote, but I don't know exactly from that. A scorching wave of pure flame passed by the man, devouring the soldiers, burning them to cinders. This was clearly no ordinary weapon. Its destructive force far exceeded the power of Molotov cocktails or tank fire. It was more akin to a pulse of concentrated energy from a nuclear blast, as impossible as that seemed, than any urban weapon. Otherworldly screams of pure agony reverberated through the war-torn battlefield now engulfed by a sea of flames. The soldiers assailed by the instantaneous burst of fire had evaporated without a trace, but the hate-filled screams of their souls rang out into the night. This was the same phenomenon that Shaiba had conjured up just a moment later.
脆い。そして弱すぎる。所詮は劣等の魂だと。
It was uncertain for how long the woman had been standing back to back with the somber man. Her tone was grim and bereft of joy, her visage deep crimson, her swaying hair the color of fresh blood and wildfire. She would possess a certain calculating beauty, were it not for the gruesome burn marks covering the left half of her face. As such, her visage evoked only a grim awe born from the marriage of the fair and the repugnant.
それで、私に何か不満があるのか。
Gracefully lighting forth a puff of cigar smoke, the woman posed a question to the man at her back. No answer came.
まあいい。殺しすぎるシュライバーと合わせれば、ちょうど均衡が取れる。無人の教授だか何だか知らない。せいぜい大事にするよ。ここは奴らにうまく攻め落としてもらう必要がある。故に殺しすぎるのも殺さなさすぎるのも等しく罪だということを自覚しているなら何も言わん。それとも貴様、一度タガが外れれば皆殺しにしてしまいかねないから抑えている。である。
No one could be blamed for mistaking the Crimson Woman's words for those of a lunatic. No sane person would speak as if they were capable of destroying the entire Red Army surrounding Berlin on a whim.
宣告、相当閣下がゆかる。無双家の長官殿も、こうるさい宣伝屋も、いずれ後を追う。そして大量の市民と同胞を道連れ、この程度の貫禄。犠牲としては、性質創造を試みるのになるほど、適当な触媒だろう。敵を幾百万刺されたことだが、守るべきたる。愛すべきと。彼ら10人の方が命は重い。それが人間というもの。さしずめ貴様はその理屈に苦しんでいるということだ。結構なことだ。
It's an interesting
昨日もまた逃げになる。
It's an interesting thing how she puts it forth very apparently that she thinks that Hitler was a charlatan, which implies that she is in the SS for a different reason. What that reason is unclear.
ザミ
The man finally spoke.
メルクリウスどこ
何？貴様。あれに何か用があると。
Silence again. The man failed to answer. The woman narrowed her eyes, her gaze heavy with suspicion, before letting loose an exasperated sigh.
やれ。まただな。寡黙すぎる男というのも考えものだな。まさか、あれと戦おうなどと考えているわけでもない。そして、仮にそうだとしたらくだらない。バカバカしいからやめておけと言って。あれは絶対に殺す。 いずれにせよ、あれは我々の上官であり、狩猟殿の盟友だ。貴様が範囲を持つというのなら、はっきり言って捨ておける。
俺にそんなつもりはない
太郎、貴様の硬すぎる頭の中に、そんな計算などあってたまるか。故に私は、さっきの質問に答えている。
She lifted her head to look up at the sky.
我らが黒煙卓の指導者お二人は兄弟のごとく仲がいい。であれば必然あれのいる場所は決定している。
Meanwhile, up in the Berlin sky tinted by blood and fire, taking form through the carnage of the capital, was a tremendous swastika, A man stood atop this towering spire in its center.
総員慶中我らが主偉大なるハガルの君の恩前であるそのお言葉目視活目して拝聴せよ
Her booming voice echoed in the ears of all living men in the city of Berlin as if through some sort of sorcery. And at that very moment, all soldiers ceased their fighting, all children dried their tears, and all elders stopped their flight. Each and every soul in the city gazed up at the sky as if possessed. Its deep canopy was tainted by the blood and fire of the city below, boiling as if it were some sort of cauldron. The Berlin Himmel. On the very day of the 1,000-year Reich crumbled to dust, a devil of blinding light descended from the heavens. The man himself. This is also a real guy, by the way. The guy to the right. His locks like a floating mane, golden in color. His regal gaze equally golden. It was the gold of splendor, of brilliance surpassing creation itself, beauty mingling with heavy solemnity, yet at the same time beastly in hue, a being that should not exist in the realm of man, the harbinger of beguiling light. At his side, a man with features vague and twisting as the darkest of shadows. He was garbed in the plain robes of a hermit, with ambitious features that made it impossible to discern his age, a yin to his yang. The two of them existed on a level far removed from that of any being gazing up at them. They were monsters, whom even the monsters feared. Number 1 and 13 of the Longinus 13 Ordens Obsidian Round Table. Its leader and vice commander. Gazing down at Berlin, no, at the entire world, the man of gold began his speech. You can see the gold man is mirroring the speech that was delivered at the beginning of the game, but he's not the same person. His voice is different.
なるべくして生まれどのような経緯をたどろうとその結末へと帰結するこの世界の仕組みとやらがそのようになっていたとしたらならばどのような努力もどのような怠慢も祈りも願いも意味はない神の恵みもそして裁きも全てそうなるように定められているだけだとしたらケラ悪魔の世界の敵として滅ぼされんとしている者たちは一辺の罪とがなしに侵され奪われ踏みにじられているに過ぎないこの忌むべき月頭の輪の中死すらもまた解放ではない英語そこに至れば回帰をなし再び始まりに戻るのみそして
But in the previous page, the character brings an interesting point that I think to an extent is true philosophically. If you exist in a deterministic world, there can be no moral judgment of action because no one is responsible for their action, right? If the course of events in history is predetermined,
I don't know.
Then you can't help doing what you have to do.
It's an interesting debate because for there to be it's an interesting debate because first you need to determine what is the order of events, like if it is predetermined, if the nature of the universe is predetermined, then the actions of the individuals how do we say it, succeed these foretold events, or if the actions of the individuals are so like logical conclusions that they are like predetermined. It's an interesting debate, I think.
Right. Which, I mean, that debate is at the crux of many historical arguments against a deterministic worldview, particularly coming from the scholastics, right? From Augustine and Thomas Aquinas and stuff. Where you can't exist in a world that is deterministic. Being a Christian, you can't believe that the world is predetermined because the lack of free will makes the concept of good and evil as a value that can be assigned to human existence through action, good or evil action, it makes that null, right? It's not valid.
It feels, yes, a real argument, but at the same time, it feels assumptuous in a sense because it feels like because it is predetermined that people doing the actions are in a sense of anything, but at the same time, you can easily understand that the the, the
Well,
determination
it
of
depends
things
on
does
the
not exclude the action.
it depends on the level of determinism, right? Because you have like hard
Yeah,
determinism of like everything is planned and there is no possibility for divergence whatsoever. Then I don't think that it's fair from that point to assign moral judgment to action because nobody could do anything else. But if it's a
you could
soft,
argue,
no, you can assign
you
moral
could argue,
judgment. You can assign moral value
yeah,
to
because
to
if
to
you,
idea, but you can't assign it to action because nobody is in control of their actions. If it's entirely predetermined from
you could argue that they still,
the
wait a minute,
start.
you could argue that they still did it in the same sense that you can criticize the soldier for just following orders. It's still a doing?
Well,
Ah,
you can criticize the doer of evil action. You can't criticize them on their action being evil. You can criticize them on their beliefs being evil. But it's much less of a strong critique if you can't actually pin their action as being a contributor to the evil of the overall person. Evil and good become less distinct in a world without free will. But if it's a soft determinism of like some outcomes are predetermined, but the general like in between point of two predetermined points are not yet determined, which is what a lot of predestination Christians believe in, right? Like we know the beginning of history, we know the end of history, but the middle part at a personal level, not at a cosmic level, is mostly indetermined, or it's generally like understandably free will. It's not exactly free will, but in effect it is. Uh, then that changes things because at the micro level there is still some level of criticism that can be leveled at individual action. It's just that the general course of history is already figured out.
there's still another argument in the sense of the, if I recall correctly, is the argument against the grandfather paradox, that the time stream kind of corrects itself.
Right.
If I recall correctly, it's the argument that if you try to kill our, using the argument of time travel, if you try to kill our grandfather, you yourself will eventually not kill him, be by someone else is stopping him, or you yourself thinking against it.
Right, but
It is determinism.
to an extent, but that takes it more to a theoretical or a speculative.
Yeah,
That takes it to speculative land, where
yeah,
we're trying to attain to
but at
theory.
the same time, it's still a reading of determinism in which you can apply condemnation to someone's actions because
Right,
they still more or less have control over them.
but
At the same time, at the same time their wants and desires will be their wanting and effectuation will be controlled, but at the same time they are still wanting it.
right. But to return
It's
to
kind of
text,
manipulation.
it's interesting that this character is employing the aesthetics of evil, right? He presents himself as the beast, like the beast of the apocalypse, right?
Yeah,
The devil, as it were, this evil creature that uses charisma to manipulate and to bring about a new age against the law of nature, which is God, right? But while he is using the aesthetic of evil, he is making a valid moral argument based on the
yeah.
assumption that no one can be considered evil by their actions in this situation because fate is simply too restrictive to allow moral judgment to happen. It's an interesting kind of dichotomy that's being presented here, almost as if the
Okay,
aesthetic.
we are literally seeing that the Nazi's devil be the good guy.
Right. It's almost as if the employ of the aesthetic of evil is more important as a to attract attention. He is employing the aesthetic of evil because it's attractive to people, right? It's provocative, right? Right. Although he himself is not trying to present himself as an agent of cosmic ontological evil. It's a very interesting thing that's going on, which is kind of like part of the reason I feel that Masada chose Nazis, right? Because the SS people use very fashionable attire. Evil has this very, very fashionable, interesting, elevated aesthetic to it that's always very mysterious and taboo. And it's automatically like attractive and provocative to people. And I feel like that's part of the meta narrative that's being employed here.
If I recall correctly, people tend to feel more attracted to the breaking of rules.
Right. Which is also like the way that he presents his invitation to this scheme is not like I am going to do something and I need people. Is I'm helping you to break universal law so that you can be free.
Yeah. And another thing, it feels interesting, his presentation. It feels nearly seductive, like he's trying to seduce the people.
Right, exactly. It's an immediate and extreme contradiction. He is the authoritarian leader, charismatic leader, that is autocratically leading people to a path of total liberation from law. He's using the language of autocracy to supposedly liberate people from ultimate autocracy. It's a very interesting presentation. He's a walking red herring, right? It's an interesting.
Not even red herring, a walking paradox in a sense.
Right.
Not paradox, but contrast.
An anti-villain, perhaps. But that's a discussion for another time.
Not an anti-villain, I would say.
Well, he's presenting himself as an anti-villain, right? He's using these brutalistic, kind of unnatural methods. You see as Shaiba like eats the souls of the dead to add to his power pool, to a purpose that is ultimately presented as a valid and perhaps even desirable outcome. But then the specifics of that are going to be explored later into the novel. So, the man's grim words.
By the way, I find it interesting because his speech works with both sides of the war. Both the Germans being destroyed by the Red Army and the Red Army being pummeled by his forces.
Right, exactly. It's very nondescript. The war is just like his presentation in the slaughter. The context doesn't matter. It's just a tool to attenuate the attention of the audience to the problem that he says is caused by universal determinism, right? If he was delivering this speech in a peaceful setting, it wouldn't make sense. But since people are in the thick of destruction and they're desperate to pin the blame on something, he goes in and he says, universal law is to blame for your suffering. Therefore, help me break it.
And another thing, he is destroying any opposition he would have.
Right.
By pretty much guaranteeing that everyone is suffering. From
Exactly.
the civilians to the Red Army invading, everyone is suffering.
Exactly.
And he just point and say, destiny is the reason. Go and fight.
The man's grim words reached every soul residing in Berlin. Nothing awaits you but eternal suffering, eternal defeat. The people of Berlin could not deny his claims. The Golden Beast's proclamation rang out with the urgency of the trumpet of the final judgment. This was a man possessed of supernatural charisma. Utilizing extreme conditions in order to manipulate the will of others was hardly a novel trick in and of itself, but the sheer scale of the man's performance here warranted deeper scrutiny. His voice possessed a magical quality, capable of penetrating the very heart of all of those who heard it. The best comparison was to the cries of the dragons from the Age of Legends, a juggernaut of a voice that would not fail to ensnare any mortal, and the being that possessed it was certainly no mortal. The Golden Beast, the Black Prince, the Harbinger of beguiling light, the Monarch of destruction, Every word that passed forth from his lips was saturated in magic. He gave the command,
思うならば戦え
and if you wish to overcome your miserable lot in life, then offer your very soul.
運命とやら有血統に入るのを拒むなら
If you long to wash away the stigma of the defeated.
共に戦え
You see, he already makes the transformation of let me help you liberate yourself to serve me in my quest to destroy universal law. It's a very, very precise trick of the tongue. Take of the
It's
pen.
nearly paradoxical. It's nearly paradoxical.
Yep.
Break your chains by serving me.
Right, right. Take the pen and sign the pact with blood. It was the temptation of the devil himself. The golden monarch looked down upon the lesser beings crawled upon the earth, and posed a question to them. Which the harbinger of beguiling light is what Lucifer means, right? The bringer, light bringer.
Yeah.
So he's presenting himself this way.
Yeah.
何を求める
It's even the way that the choice of gold, right? Like the shining metallic color of the sun. He's literally emanating the light of the bloody light of the battlefield onto the people. The answer was all too evident. Grant us victory. Grant us victory. Sieg Heil Victoria.
承諾した
A deep fissure ran across the man's perfectly beautiful face. To conjure the words of Dr. Faust, his features portrayed the uncanny equilibrium of a genuine smile and a grotesque sneer. Mephistopheles, the harbinger of beguiling light, the name of the wicked fiend that could grant any man's every wish in exchange for his living soul.
ならば我がレギオンに加わるがいい
The moment those ponderous words left his lips, the unthinkable happened. All men with guns in hand took to them to their mouths. All those wielding blades thrust them deep into their own chests. Those without armaments plunged themselves into the hellfire still raging around them. Guns roared, steel drank blood, men plunged to their deaths. Suicide unfolded on every street corner. Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands rushed to their deaths with abnormal haste, their souls being absorbed into the Golden Monarch. You see that the text doesn't make a distinction between the Germans and the Soviets here. Everyone is participating, right, in this ritual
Yes.
transformation. It was an insatiable holocaust engulfing the entire capital. This could not have been the first time. He had consumed countless souls in the past. Was this then the final ritual necessary to complete the task? A grand sacrificial altar stained by the blood of soldiers and countrymen who had looked up to him as a savior, begging him for salvation. In all its grimness, all its cruelty, all its terror, it
美
was...
しいまさに悲劇あなたをしたいあなたが守るべき者たちがあなたのせいで死んでいくあなたはそれを嘆き喜び自らの力へと変えるだろう我が友私がこの滑稽な人生でただ一人畏敬の念を抱いた獣どもあなたはこれから何をなす
The shade of a man who had remained silent until now finally spoke.
あなたは一体何を求める
愚問だな高速の破壊と超越私に道を示したのは K だもっと他に個人的興味がないでもない
And you can see that the guy that talked to him, the shade character, is the voice of the narrator from the beginning, right? The guy that delivered the original speech.
それは一体
Yeah.
法則を作ったもの
なるほどすなわち
God, or perhaps the devil. The shade cuckold, its lips widening into a smile. And it's great that this is like a metatextual subversion also, not only a textual subversion, where usually in Japanese fantasy, right, the role, the archetype of the god slayer is the hero, because usually the god of the setting is presented as this oppressive universal law that tries to keep humanity shepherded into, which is a very traditional Nietzschean outlook on the world, right? But then in Dies Irae, the God Slayer is presented as the devil, right? This evil creature that is aligned with the most evil regime on earth, sacrificing thousands of innocents to join him in his efforts, which just kind of brings this important question of like, how much of a villain is he, or how much is he trying to be presented as a hero to mitigate his villainness, even at a metatextual level. The shade chuckled, its lips widening into a smile.
私は優秀な生徒を得て幸せだ。
Yes.
エイビヒカイトを
Can
正
I
しく
tell-
理解しているのはやはり現状あなただけか。いや素晴らしい。この瞬間だけは何度経験しても飽きが来ない。それだけに正直名残惜しくもありますが。
Oh, incidentally, Ewigkeit is a Nietzschean term that we will come back to next week, when I have all of the glossary set up for the intro discussion to the next episode.
Okay.
行くのかカール。
ええ、その名も置いていきましょう。いずれ必ず会えるはず。半世紀もすれば東方のシャンバラが完成する。そこに私の代理を用意するゆえ、下僕たちの遊び相手にでもすればよろしい。今回の契約であなたの魂は他に比類なき強度を得た。性質創造の思考も果たした以上、怒りの日までこちらにとどまる理由はありますまい。クリストフのこともある。万全を期すために幾人かあちらに連れて行ってはいかがです。
無論元よりそのつもりだ。ザミエル、シュライバー、ベルリッヒング。
結構それは隙のない人選だ。というよりあの3人以外では今のあなたに随伴することなど叶わぬか。
The two men exchanged words in a casual tone, perhaps reminiscent of two chess players contemplating their moves, even as scenery from hell spread out beneath them. It was apparent why the two of them would have been seen as brothers. They shared a certain air of resigned enlightenment, as if they presided from lofty heights lesser beings could not dream of reaching. No tragedy, no comedy, no creation under the sun would move them. Their laughter was no mere sneer, nor their actions merely the result of a frozen heart. Rather, they were worn down by time itself, imbued with the uncanny aura of an ancient sage. Gazing up at the two of them were roughly 10 others in military uniform, standing completely unscathed within the decaying capital of agony that was Berlin. They were the fangs and claws of their golden master, and among them the three mentioned earlier surpassed even the rest. The Crimson Woman had tears of joy trickling down her face in response to the honor of being chosen by her golden commander. Her loyalty grew fiercer than ever. The silver-haired boy responded with salt, lamenting the temporary end of his carnage. For the moment, however, he vowed to acquiesce. The somber giant stood silent, seemingly oblivious to all but the shade he fixed his gaze upon. Worry not. Your wish will be granted soon enough. I would appreciate it if you would not glare at me quite so forcefully, the specter of a man grinned, amused by the giant's electrifying gaze, before turning his attention to his golden brother once more.
ではまたいずれ獣殿、再び我らがまみえる時こそ互いの目的が成就すると祈りましょう。
いいな。成就させると誓うのだ。傍観するだけでは何もつかない。K の悪い癖だな、カール。
確かに。であればここに誓いましょうか。
The Totenkopt Empire that had waged war against the world had finally met its end. Whether it be true or not, it is an oft-repeated anecdote. Nazi Germany, in possession of some of the world's most advanced technology during this time period, had dabbled in obscene rituals behind the scenes in a pursuit of the secrets of black magic. What became of the demons brought forth by those experiments, and all their diabolic relics? Their whereabouts would remain unknown, assuming they ever truly existed to begin with. And so, 6 long decades came and went. November 29, 2006. Mount Fuji, Aokigahara, Sea of Trees. 3:27
So we are
a.m.
now in Japan. So now we are in Japan again, of course.
The entire area was engulfed by crimson flames. A torrent of sheer energy had emerged from a nearby cave, mowing down trees and setting them ablaze. This place was a crevice in the fabric of space, a meeting point for the ley lines which spread across the earth like a net. A lone man emerged from the cave. He wore a rosary and a cassock, signaling his status as a holy member of the cloth. Indeed, the warm smile playing across his lips was what one would expect from a man of God. Yet could a man appearing in a place like this in the dead of night, emerging alongside an inferno, truly be a servant of the divine? And kneeling before him in servitude was a young woman with jet black hair. Her skin color and features clearly identified her as a native of this land. She spoke reverently, her face as expressionless as that of a statue.
ご無礼をお許しください。生産杯陛下、バレリア・トリファ狩猟代行。あなたをここへお呼びしたのは、この私の意向です。自己紹介は必要ですか？
Valeria Trifa is also a real person, by the way. Him, I am qualified to speak of. He was actually a priest, a Roman Catholic priest from Romania, and he was a hardcore Nazi, like really hardcore. So hardcore that the government of Romania pursued him even as the legionnaires began to take over, and he ran to Germany, where he would be imprisoned in their attempt to negotiate a kind of uneasy peace with Romania when they were expanding their empire over there. He would only be freed a few years later. But as a point of fact, Valeria Trifa survived his imprisonment and moved to America after a while, where he would live a full life until he was old of age. And he died there, continuing to be a hardcore Nazi and use his position in the church as kind of a way to propagate his message. He's a very disturbed individual.
Wait a minute. When did he live?
He was born in the early 20s, I think, or the early 10s. He was imprisoned in 1943. He was freed around 1945, I think, or 1946, and he died in 1983 in the real world.
Okay, because the time of the moment in the Irae is 2006, so something is not clicking.
Right.
いいえ。レオンハルト、あなたのことは覚えていますよ。キルヒアイゼン教の後を継がれた時はまだほんの子供でしたが、美しく、そして強くなられましたね。
恐縮です。
Unpleasant moaning could be heard echoing throughout the area. They were likely the souls of the men and women that had taken their own lives within this forest. The young woman paid them no heed, even as they continued to make their presence known. The priest, in contrast, inhaled them all with affection, making them his own. A blasphemous scene, an affront to all that was just. It was identical to the events of Berlin 61 years prior. Was this perhaps a continuation of what had begun that night? A priest with a voice that sang each word, before him a young woman offering nothing but the humblest of words. They exchanged a few greetings, but nothing of note. Trifles, such as how the priest had traveled from the other side of the earth by traversing its ley lines, and how the girl had altered his original path in order to lead him here. Apologies and explanations for her impudent action, as well as the reason why the priest could not possibly journey there at the present time. All of those were secondary importance, unnecessary to discuss here. There was but one thing of value.
ではこれより共に戦の続きを始めましょうか。
That one crucial point, and that alone. That they were preparing to finally unveil to the world the supreme performance they had spent so many moons preparing. Now then, may the curtains of Grand Guignol rise. Slaughter, butcher, massacre till there no more is left. Violate, conquer, and consecrate. Let there be victory. Let there be conquest. And thus...
Come. これを欲したも。
They would repeat their struggle as many times as necessary. They would continue fighting to the very limits of time itself. They had sworn to do so, and so they were bound to carry out this task. The young woman's recital of the oath of their holy crusade was met by the priest's own blessings. And so on that night in that forest, the legion that had vowed to destroy the world began to stir, unbeknownst to any. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is Dies Irae.
What does Amantes mean?
That is a great question. Amantes does mean lovers. Amentes, I'm not sure what it means. I need to double check. If anybody is willing to make that Google search, that would be great.
I can look it up.
I am more confused by the opening because it looks like the protagonist is going to be someone else.
Right. There you go. Amente is Italian for demented, insane. So demented lovers.
Makes sense.
I just love the Dies Irae prologue for how absurdly epic it is, even though the entire plot is going to have to actually start over because that cycle, right? That version of the narrative is done. So they were actually, the whole prologue was just setting up the beginning of the actual plot of the game. Where everything's going to be reintroduced because there's a change in place and time, and they have to reconstruct the events that led up to the calamity in order to actually finish the construction of their holy ark, right? Where they said that the thing that happened in Berlin was just a demo. They were just trying out to see if their ritual would work. And now that they know that it will, once it's scaled up properly, it's going to have to happen again. And supposedly, Mercurius is going to not be the same person anymore. He said, seek the me of that time and that place, right? And then the ritual will begin.
Pretty weird, which is also pretty weird because it kind of implies that to a certain degree there is reincarnation,
right,
or something akin to it.
And you have to question why does Mercurius have to change when the golden beast doesn't? Right?
No, not even, not that. Why does the Golden Beast can choose people to not change, but Mercurius can't be chosen?
Right.
This feels confusing.
Well,
It
there is an
feels
explanation
like
for everything. I'm gonna quit the game just because of audio questions, but it is something that is explored in the game later on. Why Mercurius is the one from the retinue of the Golden Beast that doesn't get to go on, while the ones that he takes with him get to continue helping him in his quest. But it is a valid question because it seems that Mercurius is the one that has given him the power to be the Golden Beast, right? When he quotes a slightly altered version of the speech from the beginning of the game, that speech was Mercurius, not his. So he has received the call from Mercurius. So how come Mercurius, who is supposedly powerful enough to grant people the ability to cast fate aside, how come he's the one that is suffering death and rebirth, right?
And how does this death and rebirth work? Is it part of the cycle?
Right.
It feels confusing.
It is confusing. It's purposefully confusing. It's very complex.
It feels nearly paradoxical, like it doesn't make sense.
And I just want to bring to the forefront here, before Mapo gets to make his question, because I know he wants to either make a question or make a point. I can tell. Mercurius, for context of the audience, right? I'm sure everybody here knows this. Mercury is the Roman version of Hermes, right? And Hermes is a very fortunate and complex figure in the history of Western esoteric and religious thought, right? In tradition, Hermes and Mercury were psychopomps. They would take spirits of the dead from the human world to the world of the dying, to Hades, where they would live out the rest of their lives, right? Or rather, their unlives. And then he would bring messages from there to the world of the living and the world of the gods, and anywhere in between that. So he carried this attribute of Hermes being a carrier of knowledge, often divine knowledge, from places that cannot be reached by mere mortals, eventually got syncretized with Thoth, the god of knowledge in Egypt, to produce the mythological figure that we know as Hermes Trismegistus, right? The supposed forefather of alchemy, as it is understood in the West, of Hermeticism, the idea, the kind of pantheistic idea that there is a macrocosm and a microcosm, and the cosmic changes in the universe at the highest plane of existence have echoes in the lowest planes of common daily life, and so as above affects below, below affects above, which is one of the reasons that people that were pertaining to these circles at the time were such fervent believers in astrology, because the movement of the stars as a macrocosmal change dictated the effects of daily life at a microcosmal daily life level. So Mercurius here in the novel is playing with that archetype of both the extremely wise temporal magus that has a divine kind of nature, right, as well as the bearer of knowledge, the bringer of knowledge, the messenger of divine knowledge to humanity, and kind of the connecting bridge between humanity, the dying, and the divine. So that's my background context for Mercurius here. That it's part of the symbology of the character. But now you're free to discuss. I just wanted to put this out there.
Mapo Tofu.
Yeah, Mapo, what is it that you wanted to bring?
I got nothing of substance to say.
Nothing of substance, at all.
Nothing of substance.
What do
No.
you have of no substance? Do you have comments on what we have read so far?
Nope. No
Nope.
comments at all.
No comments at all.
Nope.
I feel
Nope.
I feel confused
Right.
to bring my own comments.
It's the
Because
prologue. There's basically very little context to what we just saw.
yes, but because inside the little context we are given, it feels paradoxical in some moments.
Which is
Yeah.
At the same time,
right.
at the same time, it is a process that just happens. But at the same time, there is a god, an architect to it all.
Right.
At the same time, they are stuck on strings, but at the same time, they can rebel against it.
And the language that the Golden Beast employs implies
Yeah,
that he
feels
wants to not exactly that he wants to break the shackles of fate, but that he wants to become the god of the world, right?
yes,
Thereby altering the fate, but not altering the system. So he's using some there's a lot of deception going on at all levels of this conspiracy.
it feels strange.
And I feel like that's an effective, because the way that Dies Irae is constructed, Masada is a big fan of opera, right? And the way that that opera is set
clearly.
up, particularly in the Romantic period, which is what he's drawing on, German Romanticism and
Now,
Neo-Romanticism.
now that I think something,
Hmm.
what I find strange of this prologue is because I cannot yet understand what is the message that the author is bringing.
Right.
I don't know if the author is using the beast as its mouth to pose as the author and its thinkings and opinions,
Hmm.
or if it's using the beast as the point of what he doesn't think.
Right. It's an interesting, because the way that I see the prologue, I feel like the prologue is mislabeled. I don't think it's a prologue. I think it's an overture, right? If you look at opera, at Romantic opera, before the opera begins, there's a section of music that is the overture, which contains it's kind of this epic beginning, right? That not only sets up the plot of the play to follow, but that also sets up all of the individual motifs of every piece of music that is going to compose the opera as a total. It shows like little windows into each piece of music. So the way that the Dies Irae prologue is presented, it has all of the themes of the game. It has the theme of paradox, the theme of godly succession and apotheosis. It has the themes of determinism and to what extent morality can be cast on people stuck in a deterministic environment. It has the themes of the occult and of ideology and of charisma. It has all of that.
It already shows the followers of the beast itself, Mercurius.
Right.
It sets up interactions between them.
But it doesn't
As
give
for
any of the
example,
context that's going to be in the plot
yes,
proper.
and partially because it's not yet giving signs of what is the lesson behind it all, in a sense.
Right.
What is the moral of the story? It's not
Exactly.
even close to showing that.
But I do think that even though it doesn't do that, it is effective in setting up kind of the villain, right? The Golden Beast is such a tremendously imposing, menacing figure right from the get-go
Oh yeah,
of this great
oh yes.
descent onto the top of the building of the Berlin Himmel as he as he leads tens of
I
thousands of people
find
to suicide. It's very powerful
yes,
imagery.
yes. It's pretty much akin to a Lucifer-esque
True,
show off,
and
show offiness.
it's devilish in a way that I feel is missing from a lot of fiction, especially in the in Japanese fiction, where his power isn't his strength, right? He's not like smiting thousands of people with a spear or anything like that. He is using logical arguments that are attractive and reasonable
I
to
wouldn't
cause
I
people
wouldn't even argue.
to
I
do
wouldn't even
things.
I would not even call it arguments. He's more seducing the people,
Right,
using the context, using their feelings, using less of a logical argument, more of a logical excuse.
right, exactly. He's speaking to them what they want to hear, and then redirecting that energy into servitude, undying servitude to him. And that is like such a powerfully disgusting, like primally
Yeah,
evil
but
thing.
what I find interesting is that the the novel is it's at the same time trying to say that he's right and say that he's wrong.
Right, which is the paradox, right? Like at the same time, that's why I feel like at least at the onset of the novel, the Golden Beast is a bit of an anti-villain. He's still committing evil. You can see from his choice of aesthetic and what he makes people do,
Yeah,
but
yes.
he is doing so for a reason that ultimately seems to not be negative at all, at least in the way that he presents it.
Yeah, yes. The entire story in the beginning is trying to show him as the villain, but then when he starts to speak, he speaks like the story is trying to set him up as the hero.
Right.
In the same moment, he goes from the hero to the villain to the hero to the villain.
It's actually pretty evocative, I think, of if you guys ever watched Legend of Korra growing up. The first season has an antagonist that
Yeah,
is an
yeah.
anti-villain also.
Amon,
Amon is an anti-villain in the
Amon.
sense
If
that
I,
he
yeah,
commits transgressions on people's lives,
yeah.
but for a
Yeah. I
positive,
remember him.
ultimately positive political, or apparently politically positive goal, right? A positive revolution. Uh, so it kind of reminds me of that. You have something to say, Mapo?
But
Yeah.
yeah, but like the plot of that season wasn't that the guy was just using political speech to get revenge because he had daddy issues.
Oh, sure. Like the conclusion of the plot wasn't satisfactory, but the
Legend of
idea
Korra being Legend
is
of
similar.
Korra.
Right, right,
That is Legend of Korra being Legend of Korra.
right. Exactly. The execution
A
wasn't
lot
great,
of
but the idea is very
a
similar.
lot of fumbled bags.
I kind of like this archetype because it's kind of rare in fiction. I feel like there's a lot of anti-heroes, and there's a lot of villains with uh, how do I say it? Like villains that have a sad backstory that you feel bad about, but they're still villains, right? It's very difficult to actually make an anti-villain that works for any given amount of
At
time.
the same time, I kind of feel that, especially this past decade, this form of villain became way more popular.
Right,
See, albeit Thanos, Killmonger, right? Even the film of the Joker, in a sense.
right, right. The Joker film.
That's from more mainstream examples.
I feel like
If I want to pull, if I want to pull from a more, now go ahead, keep going.
all right. I was just gonna say that I think that is in part because postmodernism, literary postmodernism, is becoming more popular, right? And one of the big thrusts of that is that the world is inherently paradoxical, and that there is no objective truth. So you can have people that do bad things that are ultimately fighting for a truth that might be good, uh, and that just is part of the human experience. being human involves being a participant in paradox, uh, which is certainly like one of the things that makes Dies Irae interesting to me is its use of literary postmodernism in the sense. But I feel like that might be one of the reasons why the anti-villain is becoming popular. It's part of that postmodern urge to take stabs at the notion of objective truth and objective morality, right?
At the same time, this kind of reflects a sad thing about current view in a sense that everything is a game of perspective, and then you said there was no truth, but there's still a certain truth to things. 2 plus 2 will be 4.
Right.
Again, using the argument in the Irae, the dude is still killing people and being a Nazi and all
Right.
that stuff.
Right, exactly.
There is still an objective evil to all of it that is kind of forgotten in this big
which is
kind of revisionism about who is wrong and who is right, and it feels strange.
For sure. It's a depressing, like it's a deeply pessimistic view of like of politics, especially where like it becomes acceptable to elect or to follow doers of evil things if their ultimate goal is something that is desirable or logical. Because ultimate objective
like
morality is,
it feels like Machiavelli's point taken to the extreme.
Right. But it is an interesting.
If the ends justifying the means, then following the Nazi Lucifer devouring a lot of souls to make everyone free is okay.
And this is something that will be tackled in the novel, mostly because the protagonist of the novel is not postmodern pilled, at least not in the not at the beginning. But it is kind of a struggle, a constant struggle, of first of all, can we judge actions in a world where many things are determined, or most things, or all things? And number two, even if those actions are evil, are they justified in bringing a greater good? Is a big theme of the novel as a whole, and I think that'll be something cool to look at later on. So I guess we can cut it off here. I feel like the overture is fun enough to look at, and kind of a complete little arc in itself. That we can go through the prologue next week or next time, whenever that happens. And I'll make sure to bring the documentation that I need on the people that we met today, and some more relevant symbology if I can find any. And we can open up the next episode with some discussion of that before we jump back into the narrative. Do you guys have any other observations before we call it quits?
No.
I find interesting that the opening kind of sets up for what to expect. Apparently there will be a romance, there will be a blonde waifu, there will be the present day versions of the villains from the prologue, there will be maybe flashbacks back to Nazi Germany, there will be a confrontation, a protagonist that feels like it will be Shiroemiya-esque.
Right.
And again, with all these arguments, all of the Golden Beast feels interesting because, again, I'm trying to now predict the whole story, but I can see the ending. I still can't see what the message of the author will be. That's what scares me the most about this. Changes me the most about the story. So anyway, it'll be interesting to watch.
Alrighty.
I guess.
Great. So we'll keep on going next time, and Fare thee well. Bye.
Farewell.